Hey folks, what's going on? Good to see you. Let's dive right in. So this video is all about how can you build your skill set to be the most successful, most in demand, and just have fun creating the things you love. And I think this is a challenge whether you're at the beginning stages of your career, the middle of your career, or even as an advanced user trying to figure out, like what skill should I learn next? It's a question you're going to ask yourself forever. I think that's something to get comfortable with right off the bat, which is that you'll always be learning in this industry. I don't know anyone who says, I am using the same techniques that I used 10 years ago, doing those things today. Things are constantly evolving. New hardware comes out, new workflows come out, new applications come out, new combinations of applications become popular. So constantly learning and having fun while learning is something that I just recommend getting used to and learning to love a little bit. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is going to revolve around skill development and kind of this very interesting idea that I do not take credit for inventing by any means. I heard this told to me at some point. I wish I remember I knew who told me. I'm sure it's a concept that is readily available on the internet, but it's called a T-shaped skill set. T as in Tom. Now, we're going to talk a lot about that. We're also going to talk about how that progresses over your career. And then also really the importance of communication and how I find that's changing over the last bunch of years in our industry, and how your skill development, and especially this T-shaped skill set, really can lend itself to making you an effective and really kind of important communicator on a project, which I find throughout my career, being able to communicate, being able to understand what other people are even working on, even if I can't get involved with it, just understanding some of the language they're using has really made me effective on projects. So the idea here is that we are going to have a T-shaped skill set. And let me bust out my MS Paint here. Now, the overall idea with the T-shaped skill set is that on our X-axis, we have all of our different skills. And on our Y-axis, we have our capabilities and competencies, where the top up here of the Y-axis is kind of beginner level skills. And as you go deeper down, you're essentially going deeper into these skills and becoming more proficient and more expert-like at these skills. But it can be really easy to look at this and say, well, I'm just starting or I'm in the middle. How do I even approach getting this T situation happening? So I'll make a new one, and I'm going to talk through the T as I would also recommend for folks that are just starting out how they might want to structure their journey. Because I find this is a common question I get a lot is, what should I learn? What should I do first? How am I gonna, get some gigs, be effective, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're just starting your journey, maybe even if you're in the middle of your journey, what I would recommend is really focusing on making the T base layer. Now, I don't think this has to be super extensive, because over time, you'll see as I'm kind of drawing this life journey of somebody in our industry out, it's going to expand in both directions. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, well, I want to get involved in interactive immersive media. The big platforms I'm seeing currently, I hear a lot of talk about TouchDesigner, Houdini, Unreal, Notch, Unity, Processing, Max MSP, and the list goes on and on and on. Cables, GL, all these kind of really great platforms. Now, there's no way you're going to learn all of these platforms. And I would almost say, actually, at the beginning, you don't even want to have a basic understanding of all of them. I would always recommend start with 3 or 4 of these things right at the beginning of your journey, before you even decide, I'm going to become really good at this one. Because I find a lot of the time, these tools are so powerful. Learning any of these tools and becoming good at one of these tools is going to make you an in-demand person in our industry. Now, the best way to find out which one you actually might enjoy the best for the long term is by trying them. So when I would start my journey now, I would say I would start with a little line here. And as I'm doing, my first 6 months in the industry, 1 year in the industry, I'm actually just doing a bunch of 101 level courses. Now, this T is not going to be as wide as it will be when I'm more of an expert, but I want to start with things like picking a few of these platforms and doing 1-day or 2-day courses in them. So that might be a combination of, let me do a few beginner courses of TouchDesigner. Let me do a few beginner courses of Unreal Engine. Let me do a few beginner courses of Max MSP. Now this stack that you choose is kind of arbitrary. It really just depends on what your interests are. So because we're talking about real-time media, these are things that I would probably pick: TouchDesigner, Unreal, maybe some Max MSP, just because I come from a music background and I love DSP. But maybe if you're more interested in VFX or simulations, big particle systems, procedural stuff, you might even want to put something like Houdini in there or Grasshopper. Almost doesn't really matter. Blender would be another good option to put in there. But I would say pick 3 of these, maybe 4 of these, and start to build out your initial top of your T. Now this is going to serve a couple of different purposes. First, like I said, you're actually going to get hands-on in some of these things. You're going to make your first networks in TouchDesigner. You might even just make a couple of really simple games in Unreal, not even, set aside all the interactive and immersive stuff. Just make a couple of really simple games. You might go into Houdini, make your first simulations, erode your first height fields, all that kind of fun stuff. And then you'll actually find, and especially self-reflection is a big thing I always talk about, you're naturally going to be gravitating towards one of them. You might do your beginner TouchDesigner course, your beginner Unreal course, you might be in the beginner Houdini course, and you're like, oh, well, I want to keep going in on this Houdini stuff. And I think that's a really good thing to be aware of how you feel as you're learning these tools, because you're going to be in this industry for a long time. You really want to enjoy the tools that you're using, and there's going to be a lot of time commitment that you're going to have and a lot of investment that you're going to make in this tool. Cost aside, time being the bigger expense that you're going to make over your career. So you really want to like that thing. And I think getting hands-on in a couple platforms really helps start that out. Now, the other really important thing here is you're also going to start to learn to communicate in the language of the people who also work in these tools. So by doing a simple TouchDesigner, couple of tutorials, by doing a couple of Unreal Engine tutorials, by doing a couple Houdini tutorials, whichever one you end up choosing, so let's say, for example, you actually end up going the Unreal Engine route, and you really love that real-time polish, you love making Niagara particles, you love getting in there, you love blueprints, whatever the aspect is that you like. Once you start to extend that T, which I think is the next step here we'll talk about, because you've done a couple of introductory TouchDesigner courses and a couple of introductory Houdini courses, if you're working on a project where you're an Unreal developer and a TouchDesigner developer, you're going to be able to understand what they're saying. You're going to be able to ask them for specific things you need. You'll know what OSC is, and you can say specifically, hey, can you set up a couple of LFOs and send them to me over OSC? Doing something like that in Unreal might not be very intuitive. Vice versa, you might go to the Houdini person and say, hey, generating these kind of landscapes is not really easy in Unreal, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not a big Unreal expert, but you might say, hey, can you, I've played with height fields a little bit. Can you set up some height fields, erode them, and send me the kind of meshes as an output? Even those things that feel really basic in terms of communication end up being really powerful tools that you'll continue to build on for the rest of your career. And then as you kind of move higher in the food chain of projects, as you become more senior, that communication language that you have really unlocks your creative potential, because then you can actually ask people for the very specific things you want to help achieve your creative vision. If you don't have that language of communication, being able to ask for specific things, you're basically just asking like a web developer, hey, can you make me a nice website? And you're just hoping and gambling that they're going to come back with what you want. But without a bit of language, it's really just a gamble. So let's say you've done your beginner intro journey here. You've done a couple of TouchDesigner courses, couple of Unreal courses, couple of Houdini courses. And then let's say, for the sake of this example, you start to think, you know what? I really like TouchDesigner. I'm going to get deeper into TouchDesigner. And that's where I think now is an important time to start building the kind of, the trunk of the T here. And you can start saying, okay, well, the next 6 months, a year, I'm actually just going to become really serious about getting my skill level deeper and deeper into this one particular skill. Now you can notice this T is still very small. We are not an expert of TouchDesigner. We only know a little bit about a couple platforms, but I really can vouch for most hiring people. If I see someone that has this, they are an immediately hireable asset. This is somebody that I want to bring in. This is somebody that I want to continue to train and work with and watch as they develop, or even help them develop their skills further, because they're going to be able to do specific things. And let's say even, for example, that getting down to this level of T, capability makes you an intermediate TouchDesigner developer. That's great. Intermediate developers are very powerful now. Because of how software has changed, what used to be an intermediate user of TouchDesigner or Unreal, that person was not very effective. I've been there, being an intermediate at TouchDesigner 10 years ago. You could do some things, but you would hit a lot of walls very quickly. Now, if you're an intermediate of TouchDesigner or Unreal, you're able to connect to tons of hardware, process a bunch of data, connect with other platforms, output a bunch of, GPU optimized content and environments. The level of things that you can do as an intermediate now are very powerful. So don't doubt that kind of ability of an intermediate. Even if you're kind of thinking, oh, well, I'm not a pro yet. I don't feel like I can optimize these networks. I can't do the things I see the pros doing. Don't worry. Even as an intermediate in one skill, with a couple of basics of a few other skills that help you communicate on a team, that is a very good place to be within your first year or two in the industry. Now, when you get here, this is always kind of the perennial debate of, should I specialize or should I become a generalist? Now, this is something that has changed over the last couple years. When I came into this industry about 13 years ago now, if I can believe the number gets larger every time I have to say it out loud, specialists were the key to making things work. Because these platforms were still so new, because the industry was still so new, you really had to have an expert to finish things on a project. Even doing things as simple as GPU optimizing some workflows, whether you're in TouchDesigner or a game engine, you kind of had to get into shaders and get your hands dirty a bit. So that's why back then I went down the path of specialization. And then over time, I kind of expanded my T skill set a little bit. But what I see now is actually the ability for all these platforms to work together makes a generalist a very compelling thing in our industry. Now, by generalist, I don't mean, take this T and just do this with it. That is somebody that I would actually worry about bringing onto a project, because for me, it feels like they don't have as much focus and they might not be able to actually finish a project. So what I would suggest in this case, let me undo that, is now that you've got your T, if you're going the route of specialization, and this is again another thing of self-reflection, you just have to figure out, what makes me tick? What do I enjoy doing? Do I like going all the way down to the bottom of something and figuring out every single nook and cranny of it? Then what you would do in this case is maybe for the next year or two, you continue to extend that base kind of shaft trunk of the T and continue to dive your expertise in. And then maybe over time, you just add one or maybe two more platforms just as things you've done in the side. So maybe you took a beginner JavaScript course, maybe you took a beginner Blender course, just so that you're kind of continuing to build your communication strength, your ability to communicate creatively, understand what people are doing in their applications. And the nice thing is, it's not a very hard thing to do. It can be an active thing where you're watching these tutorials and following along. But actually, a secret trick that I use a lot of the time, if I'm working, I'll just put tutorials on in the background and I'll just listen to the people talk about their workflows. I'm not even following along with a lot of these tutorials, but even just doing that, I can talk about VATs in Houdini. I can talk about Node or Niagara module scripts in Unreal. I could never build these things myself, but I understand the language. I've heard people talk about the process and workflows, and that becomes a very useful skill. Now let's back it up 2 steps, and let's say you're actually at this stage and you say, you know what, specialization isn't for me. I kind of like to mix it up every day. I like using multiple platforms. I really just want to focus on getting the most bang for buck out of each of these platforms. And then eventually, if I need an expert, I can just hire them in and bring them to help on the project. This is where I would then recommend, you know what, it's still probably pretty effective to lengthen the trunk of your T a little bit. Now, by this case, this is now just getting into a little bit deeper intermediate areas. You're by no means expert or guru. And then what I would do is pick another one of these kind of platforms, and it could be one of the ones you had originally. It could be a new one that You know, maybe AR is popping off, maybe VR or XR, virtual production is popping off. You're really interested in this new skill. And then you would start to expand this one down and creating a second trunk of your tree. Now, by all means, that trunk is not going to be as deep as the first trunk because you've been doing that first trunk a little bit longer, but that's okay. Because if you're at a position where you're choosing some of these platforms well and, you know, talking to folks in the community, by this point, maybe you've been in the industry a little bit, you've seen what projects are using in terms of combinations of software. One of the really great things about this generalist approach is that interchange of data is so easy. NDI, Spout, Siphon, OSC, ArtNet, DMX, MIDI, like UDP, JSON, WebSockets, MQTT. There are so many ways to just pass data in real time between applications that you can actually take an application like TouchDesigner, which is an amazing Swiss Army knife data processor, connector of all things, and then pair it up with an app like Unreal, which is just really amazing at building content in real time, Niagara particles, all that good stuff. And these two things can kind of cover each other's weaknesses and give you really amazing results, even if you're just an intermediate at both of these things. So now you might be thinking, okay, over this next kind of 6 months or a year, I'm developing this other skill set and continuing to kind of lengthen that. And then what I would do here is also, if you're staying in this generalist route, this is where your communication becomes even more important. Because at this point, you are not going to be the specialist that people call and put in a silo. So when you're a specialist, like myself, I'm a specialist of TouchDesigner. If I was to get a call for a project, the person calling me knows inherently that Elburz is going to stay in this lane and go down this, you know, racetrack like an F1 race car, just down the line here, and they're going to get us to our objective in this thing. They are not bringing me in with the expectation that I am going to then somehow jump into Houdini and output some assets, or I'm going to jump into Cinema 4D and clean up some, mesh topography or any of that kind of stuff. When you hire a specialist, you know, you're getting an F1 race car that goes in a straight line. Now, on the other hand, when you're getting someone who has multiple skill sets, that's where the communication becomes even more important. That's where having the basic skills in a couple of platforms becomes even more valuable for you, because then you might say, okay, well, I have a little bit of Houdini skills. I'm a higher intermediate of TouchDesigner. I'm a kind of beginner intermediate of Unreal. But you know what? I'm going to just make sure that I have maybe some basic Blender skills. Maybe I'm going to make sure I have a little bit of skills in a platform like Cables GL just for translating stuff to web. Maybe I'm going to make sure I have a little bit of skills with Max MSP if I need to do some additional data processing, or maybe I have XYZ skill that you want to add here and whatever interests you. As a generalist, this form of the T starts to become really valuable because now not only are you able to execute a certain level of things, you know, as a higher intermediate TouchDesigner developer, as a middle kind of mid-tier intermediate Unreal developer, you're gonna be pretty effective, but you're also able to now direct, be more in that creative leadership position, because you're able to take an idea and say, you know what, the best way I've touched, you know, these 5 or 6 platforms and I'm pretty good at 2 of them. The best way for me to get from idea to execution is gonna be, I'll do this in TouchDesigner, I'll do this in Unreal. I'm actually gonna need a specialist to come help me finish something in TouchDesigner. That's gonna be a really specific component we need. And then I'm gonna hire somebody on the team that's gonna be able to do something in Blender that's gonna be very customized, and I know exactly kind of how I want them to do it and what I want them to output, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see how this starts to become a really valuable asset on teams. Now, again, there is no better or worse between this specialization and generalization. I think it just becomes a matter of preference. Like I said earlier, do you like getting really deep in stuff? Do you like staying higher level, maybe more prototyping, expanding the team, that kind of vibe? Maybe you're more of a generalist. Now, I think as you're getting to this point, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the differences here. So if this in the middle was our generalist, we could say something like this was our specialist track. Now let's say we're a couple years into our career now. You know, if I was on the specialist side, I'm starting to become a low-level expert. You know, I'm starting to become well-known in the TouchDesigner community as somebody who really knows their stuff, who can come in, optimize projects, who can come in, build really complex Python extensions, all that good stuff. And I have a little bit of experience with Unreal. I've done a couple beginner courses, done a couple beginner Houdini courses. I just know how to talk to these people. I know what interchange formats we're going to have available, etc. And then on our generalist form, kind of generalist template, you're more of a higher intermediate, mid-tier intermediate TouchDesigner developer. You're a mid-tier intermediate kind of Unreal developer. You've done a couple Houdini courses, a couple Blender courses, maybe a Max MSP course, a processing course. Maybe you took a Grandma course so that you know how lighting consoles work. You know, if lighting and concerts are your thing, great. You add a little bit of basics of that to your skill set. Now, as you continue to develop, this kind of even becomes more personal choice because, for example, the specialist has no limit to how specialized they can get. So if you get to this point, which I would say maybe 3-4 years into your career, 5 years into your career, you can start to decide, you know, now that I'm a specialist, do I want to continue to dive in deep into this? Do I want to continue to start making C++ operators, for example, in TouchDesigner, or really get into shaders and generating visual shaders? Or is now the time in my career where, you know what, now even becoming an intermediate Unreal developer opens up a whole new world of possibilities for me as an expert TouchDesigner developer? That's also a great thing you can do. Or what you can do is if you're interested in something like technical direction, you know, being a technical director as a long-term career, then what you would say is, you know what, now it's really time for me to expand my T kind of top so that I can be able to talk to people. So maybe you take a basic network engineering course. Now you know how to talk to the infrastructure guys. Maybe you take a course about media servers. Now you know all about the media server landscape and what options you have and how much they cost and who does what better. All of these things are definitely within the reasonable area of being effective, having a successful career, but it all depends on what do you like. And I think as you kind of get through this, and if I even go back to making a new canvas here, I always say a great place to start is at the top of your T. Start with a couple of really basic courses for 2 or 3 platforms. Really get a feel for the different platforms. Don't just think because something is shiny, it's always going to be shiny. You know, at one point in my career, Max MSP was the shiniest. At another point, processing was the shiniest. At another point, TouchDesigner was the shiniest. Lately, Unreal has been the shiniest. You know, Notch has been the shiniest. All these platforms, Unity was the shiniest for a while. If you can, you know, for folks that are just in the industry, there was a while where people were flocking to Unity like crazy because it was affordable, had a giant asset store. So the shininess of objects and platforms always changes. And the best thing you can do, try a couple of them, figure out what sticks, and then I would just say immediately dive into becoming an intermediate at one of those things. Then from there, you're already viable in the industry. You're already somebody that can be hired, brought onto projects for your intermediate level skills, but also for your ability to communicate with team members. And then from there, you can pick, do I want to specialize? Do I want to dive real deep? Or do I want to kind of open up my skill set, try a bunch of different things, maybe become an intermediate at something else and keep growing from there? So I hope that helps. It's a very common question that I constantly see. Microsoft Paint really is all you need to represent the journey of us in the industry. I think this T-shaped development skill set is a great thing to think about and a great thing to visualize. You know, if I was going to imagine my T now after about a decade in this industry, I would say it looks something like this. I have a lot of beginner skills in so many platforms, whether it comes to even things like WordPress and OBS and, you know, Unreal and Houdini and Notch, you know, like the networking engineering stuff. I just have a lot of skills across the top, which is why a lot of the times people like to bring me onto projects as a technical director, because I can talk to these different things. When things start to break, I can have some inkling of, oh, you know what, like it's probably in this part of the chain where it's breaking. And then, as most folks know, I'm an expert of TouchDesigner. So that's my big kind of trunk of my T. And then I would say, you know, the rest of my skills are kind of just little droplets on the T. You know, a little bit of Unreal, a little bit of Notch, very light beginner, web development, networking, somebody who can run a business, teacher, maybe a little bit better. I think I'm pretty good at communicating, that kind of stuff. So this is, and even after 13 years of being in this industry, that's kind of what my T looks like. So don't be discouraged if you think that, your T has to look something crazy where you have 10 specializations and you're an expert at everything and, you know everything in the world. That's not real. That doesn't exist. Don't be daunted by that. Start simple, start with a little bit of a T, expand out, and then figure out, do I want to keep expanding this way? Do I want to keep expanding this way? And over time, platforms will change, the shininess will change. You might find that becoming an intermediate in something gives you a quick short-term benefit. For example, if I was to put something out there right now, people who know TouchDesigner and Unreal, even both at an intermediate level, can't find enough of those people. So if you know a little bit of those, obviously you got some short-term gain, but it also depends on what you want to do for the long term. And if this is a topic you're interested in, I highly recommend checking out the Framework Los Angeles conference that's coming up August 4th and 5th. I'm going to be there talking on a panel with a bunch of wonderful folks about this very topic and actually expanding on it to talk about the future of technology in our industry, how to stay relevant, how to thrive. And we're all going to be sharing a lot of really cool experiences we've had. So we'll put a link in the description if you want to get tickets to that. It's going to be a really lovely time, lots of really high-end folks, great networking, and I hope to see you there. Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.